Who's heard the term DevSecOps? Okay. Who understands it? Cool. Let's see where we get to. So the agenda is DevSecOps, just an introduction. Then we're going to do DevOps, which of course we all understand, right? Okay. And then we'll move on to the main meat. So this is, I've decided to use some very coy little diagrams here. These are silos. I tried to use actual silos. I tried to find a good image for silos, but they all look like databases or farmyards or something. Anyway, so I think a lot of what I'm going to say here is generalized. So your experiences may differ, I would say not entirely, but to some extent. And you will be looking at these and going, well, I don't do this in this order. I do it in a different order. Please try and just suspend your disbelief as we go through. I'm happy to take questions at the end, or for you to come and beard me later. So here I'm thinking that the developers, they do development, and then at some point maybe the security is going to do a security review of it, and then ops will finally deliver it into the field for into production for customers to use. I think this is certainly not the only way it works, but in the old waterfall days when you worked for insurance companies, this is an approximation of the model, the flow of the software development lifecycle. I was showing the wrong picture, wasn't I? What am I doing here? I'm absolutely going crazy. So, did you see this picture already? No. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. I thought I was talking to this picture, but I was talking to my picture here on the screen, and it was different. So these are the silos. These are the little castles. Dev develops some code. Then when they think it's ready, generally at the end of a 3-month development process, the security team will come in and do a security review of it and go, oh, no, you got this weakness here, that weakness there, chuck it back. We'll go through that bit a little bit at a time. And then finally, when everybody's happy, we're going to deliver it into production. And this flow, I wouldn't say is it's certainly not universal anymore. It wasn't universal back then, but I think it's a rough approximation. Agile, if you look at Scrum, for instance, it talks about teams of cross-functional team members. They should be able to do everything to get stuff out into production. And, if you squint at it naively, you could say, well, maybe that includes all of the security work to make sure that the code is secure. Maybe it includes all of the work to get it built and released into production, to maintain it into production, to monitor it, and to deal with defects as they come in. All of these things. This is the Agile dream. We have a small team. They're responsible for this piece of code, and the world is good. Does anyone work in a team like that? Oh. We had a sort of maybe from somebody. Nonetheless, it's really rare, okay? Even in these places where they think they are agile, hyper-performant teams, it's really rare. And I think one of the issues is that, in fact, security, dev, and ops are to some extent orthogonal concerns. Now, some of the things I put on the axes, we can argue about whether they're on the right axis, but in fact, a developer didn't become a developer to read the OWASP report every time it comes out. We'd love them to, but they're more focused on tools and code, and as we heard in the previous talks, algorithms and things like that. And so they're orthogonal concerns, and it's really hard to find people that are good at all of these and put them into a cohesive team 100% of the time. That's just my experience. And so this is where I think the problem breaks down. DevSecOps is making a promise, or at least it's painting a rosy picture of the future where we can have a team of professionals that can own the entire process around a product. And this is something that I think is, personally, I think it's a pipe dream. I've certainly never seen it. So let's leave the sec out of it. I have to say that very carefully. Let's leave the sec out of it and just deal with DevOps. What is DevOps? Not a rhetorical question. Does anyone have an offering? You're not paying attention, John. You can try. Oh, no, we have someone at the back. Please, Tim.
It's a new name for
Thank you very much. So, there is no universally agreed definition of the term. The links to the articles that I use, this one actually just came directly out of Wikipedia, which is very lazy of me. But it says, characterized by key principles of shared ownership, workflow automation, and rapid feedback. At its most successful, DevOps is a combination of specific practices, culture change, and tools, which is a renaming of Ops, I guess. And finally, Bass, Weber, and Zhu say it's a set of practices intended to reduce the time between committing a change to a system and the change being placed into known production while ensuring high quality. Well, I don't think we can argue about any of those things, but at the same point, most places you go to, you find that there's a DevOps team. And that DevOps team may have a little bit more dev experience than the old Ops team did, but essentially it's the Ops team that have been given the keys to the CI pipelines. However, that hasn't stopped people that have a more enlightened view of DevOps doing lots of important research, because there actually is a lot of good DevOps out there. And so one of the common statements people say about DevOps is that DevOps is a mindset. Right? Well, that's what they say about Agile as well. And that's what they say about most things that people think are get quite hyped and are quite difficult to get good at. The Accelerate book, has anyone read the Accelerate book? A couple. If you are working this field, it is actually a very good book. It has a lot of good advice in it, and it is based on actual research. A lot of the research is done by questionnaires, so we could certainly question the academic foundations of it, but it is good research. And they identified four metrics here that you should be looking to improve once you have adopted a DevOps way of working. So you want to reduce lead or cycle time. You want to have a higher deployment frequency so you can get things in front of the customer and get feedback sooner. You get a shorter mean time to restore, not a longer mean time between failure. They're not trying to make you be really, really sure it's not going to break, but if it does break, you want to be able to get it back up and running very quickly. And they do want a lower change fail percentage, so they want fewer deployments to actually need to be fixed. Before Accelerate came out, many years, there was a book called The Phoenix Project, which, well, I apologize to the Americans in the room. It's a horribly American book. It's a wonderful book, but at the same time, it tells a very, very emotional story. If you haven't read it, it's definitely worth a read. If you prefer to read something that's in the same space that is slightly more Northern European, I would recommend a book by a New Zealander called Clark Ching called Rolling Rocks Downhill. So the typical transformation for DevOps is exactly as was described by Tim. We have dev dumping something to ops that needs to be released, and now we have dev dumping something to DevOps that needs to be released. That's the typical process. I mean, I know this is excessively cynical, but I just can't help myself. And living the dream was always DevOps, right? So I've scaled back our dream Agile team now. We've got a DevOps team, we've got dev and ops all in the same team working together. And the reason this doesn't work is the same reason as I showed when we were talking about the DevSecOps slide, is because dev and ops are orthogonal. You need different, in most organizations, they have barriers of trust. You have barriers of control about which parts of the infrastructure a particular role is allowed access to. And you have different skills and experiences that you need to keep updated. You also typically have a need for fewer people to have knowledge of the ops. And in fact, it can be quite difficult to find someone who has enough skills in the ops to assign them and allocate them to a dream team full time. So it just makes it really hard to manage personnel when you try and live like this. And so what I've seen work successfully is having ops as a platform team, whereas there is an ops team who will build tools that allow you to create CI pipelines that conform to the way the organization wants to work. This then gives the tools to the dev team to configure and deploy the CI pipelines that they want, but still conform to the organization's requirements or constraints. And I'm using CI pipelines as a sort of placeholder for anything. So for instance, we could do the same for databases. One of the things that a lot of organizations don't want is a completely heterogeneous slew of every different database configured in every different way. And when patches come out, we have to apply patches to, 97 different platforms on 33 different cloud providers. And so the role of the ops team is to identify, with the help of the CTO and strategic guidance from the board or whatever, your enterprise architects, if you have such a thing, you identify the platforms that you want to use, the tools that you want to use and how you want them deployed on those platforms, the security constraints, automated updates and application of patches and so on. And so the ops team builds the tools that allow the dev team to then manage the creation, the running, and the monitoring of those, while removing from the dev team any responsibility for choosing the tools or configuring the tools or needing to patch the tools with security updates. Basically, give the dev teams the tools they need to manage those things that they need, but they shouldn't need to worry about. So let's think about DevSecOps. So you probably know where I'm going here. I've talked about platform teams for DevOps, but before we get there, I would like to introduce you to a survey that was done 2020, I think it was, by DevOps.com and GitLab. In fact, it was a gentleman from GitLab that ran it. And he asked, these are 4 statements that came out of that query, which is, who owns security? Well, in some places, they said, well, the dev teams own it. And typically, what I've seen when dev teams own it is that there are vulnerabilities galore. The security is always a second-order concern. Somebody said, one person volunteered that he regularly puts security suggestions in the box of suggestions, but they always get ignored. Or there's a security team, but we never get to meet them, so we just ignore them. Or I'm the only one, this is the victim speaking, I'm the only one that cares about security in the organization, which is, I hope, manifestly untrue. Nonetheless, these are actual quotes, and basically what came out of this research was that nobody knew who owned security. There was a pretty much even split of it's owned by dev, it's owned by security, it's owned by everyone. Nobody knows. There was no standardized way of doing it. I have to say that in the current organization that I work for, they have got an answer to this. I don't like it. I'm not actually working on a dev team, but my guess is the dev teams don't much like it. But what happens is the devs work away, they work away happily committing to codebase, and in the background, like some sort of secret police force, the security team runs scans on their code. And based on those scans, they create tickets in their backlog for them. What do you think about that? If you came in the morning and found 30 security tickets waiting for you in your backlog, how would you feel? Yeah, Tim. Okay with that? You're okay with that? Okay, well, I mean, there's no war. I mean, we do have 15% churn, but I'm sure it's nothing to do with having the tickets put in. Yes, it is spectacularly unhelpful. Essentially, I need to be kind to my employer. The reason we're doing this is because there had been no attention to security for several years. And so there were an awful lot of problems that needed to be fixed. And rather than try and prioritize it within the team, it was prioritized from outside the team, which I think is a good idea. There is some training, but the jury is out. I should probably say less about my employer than I am. Yes?
Sorry, I seem to be talkative, but we have a slightly worse thing, which is we get given a spreadsheet in which we have to identify the lines that apply to us on the spreadsheet is across the whole organisation.
Okay.
I would much prefer to have Jira tickets that actually it's our team that was specific to our team. That explains what we do.
Okay, I think you're right. Yours is worse. Gail.
Please can we have some of the answers to this in my workshop on Saturday afternoon? Please, 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 that would be brilliant.
There you go. There's a plug for a workshop on Saturday afternoon. So the truth is that people, you can tell people what you want them to do, but they will do what they want to do anyway. And that might not be what you want to do. Architects should know about this. It's been called desire paths. If you build a path and there's a shorter way across the grass, we're going to go across the grass. You can do what you like. So let's build on DevOps. Let's create a team that creates tools that can be used by the dev team to support the requirements of the ops constraints of the organization, that can be used to support the dev team around the security requirements of the organization. Let's even mandate the use of these tools. So I had the luck or bad luck of working for Amazon for a year once upon a time, and this is their approach. They have a huge organization, and they have actually a massive platform team, and they build their own dependency management systems. They build their own pipeline and deployment systems, and you can do anything you want that those systems will let you do. And that worked. I mean, it was quite a learning curve. So I call it building on DevOps there, but in fact, really it's dev enablement. You know, we still need to train people, but this is enabling the dev team to do what they would like to do, but they don't have the time or the experience or the expertise to do. And we then specialize a team to provide those tools. Those teams should get feedback from the dev team. So a long-time contributor to ACCU, who no longer comes, a guy called Giovanni Asproni, and we worked with a company called Ericsson, and we did some consulting in Ireland, and Giovanni came away and he said, it's really strange. It's like the tail is wagging the dog. The ops team is telling the dev team what to do. And this is what we want to get away from. We don't want the dev team to be an appendage of the ops team. We really do want DevSecOps to be a collaborative activity where the dev team says, we've got these security problems and we really need some tooling to help us. And the security team respond to that and provide the tooling that's required to enable their dev teams to deliver the software that the organization needs. So I think this is the meat of what I wanted to say. The next bits are just really so I can show off my eclectic background. This bit of Shakespeare from Romeo and Juliet. And the real question behind it that I'm asking here is, what is in a name, right? So we get hung up on Agile, and maybe not so many people in this conference, but people do get hung up on Agile and arguing about real Agile and safe and scaled Agile. We get hung up on DevOps and DevSecOps. And as Tim had identified, DevOps is quite often it's quite often just the ops team relabeled DevOps because DevOps is trendy. Agile, quite often you go on the whole organization goes on a one-day training course, and suddenly your product manager has become a product owner, and your team lead has become a scrum master. And we change names, but the name isn't the thing. In the same way that if you called a rose a toad, it would still smell like a rose. It would still smell just as sweet. And just to labor the point, the name is not the thing. However, names are important. Arlo Belshi, many years ago, wrote a series of blog posts called Naming as a Process. And he's rewritten it recently, and this is the updated version. And one of the stages in the process is called Get to Complete Honesty. And when we label an ops team DevOps, we are being dishonest. When we label a waterfall process Agile, we are being dishonest. Honest looks a bit like this. Either we get to the dream team, which might be because you're a startup and you only have 5 people in your organization, or we have enablement teams providing the tools that can be used by the developer community to deliver the software that our company requires and our customer needs. This is dishonest. If developers are still just writing code and then something else outside of them is checking, processing, telling them what to do, acting as a gatekeeper, this is not DevSecOps. Oops. So the takeaways is, just because someone calls something a rose, it doesn't make it a rose. You have to look beneath the name. If you go for a job interview and you're told you're going to a DevOps team, work out, what does that mean? How can there be a DevOps team? Am I providing tools for the development organization, or am I just a downstream service function for developers? To get to a place where DevSecOps work, unless, like I said, you have this small magic startup team, well, there's some investment required to get there. Same goes for Agile. I also pontificate a lot about BDD. To get to a team that works well in a behavior-driven way takes a massive amount of investment. There's huge return on those investments typically in all cases, but you have to make the investment first. You can't try it and then apply the investment belatedly and hope that things are going to get better. The horse is often bolted from the stable by then. So the platform teams that I've described here, which maybe some of you have seen work, I have definitely seen work in Amazon and elsewhere, they facilitate delivery and enable consistency. This is a massive benefit. It's not an attempt to constrain the development team to say, you must always use Oracle as your database. It's a way of trying to ensure that we have a satisfactorily wide arena of choice so that we can deliver quality products, but that we have some consistency so we can actually manage our runtime real estate. And finally, this is a process change, and it's not a side effect of renaming. Process changes themselves are hard to implement, really hard to implement well, and they take a great deal of thought, and as I said earlier, investment. So, thank you very much, and let's get some tea.